Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special feature program for Activist Appreciation Month. This is our opportunity each year to celebrate your activism for animals. My name's Lisa Levinson. I'm going to be your host today for this program. And this is a very special feature series called Activist Author Interviews. And we're doing this as part of our Sustainable Activism program, which offers emotional and spiritual tools for animal activists. And today we're going to be featuring Dr. Melanie Joy, who wrote a new book, which I have a copy of. I'm so excited. Here's a little plug for the book. And we're going to be having a conversation with Melanie shortly. Before we do, I'm going to let you know a little bit more about her. So Dr. Melanie Joy is a psychologist, educator, international speaker, and relationship coach. She is the author of 6 books, including Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, Beyond Beliefs, a guide to improving relationships and communication for vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters, Powerarchy, Understanding the Psychology of Oppression for Social Transformation, and Getting Relationships Right. She is also the founding president of Beyond Carnism and co-founder of Pro-Veg International. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Melanie. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm really honored to be talking as part of Activist Appreciation Month, because if there's one thing I feel all the time, it's such deep gratitude for activists in the world. People who are working so tirelessly and committed to making the world a better place for all beings.
Oh, yes, and you have inspired many, many activists. So this is perfect, actually, to have you on board today. Yay. Well, I have a few questions for you. We're going to do this interview style. So my first question is, why did you decide to write this book, Getting Relationships Right?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I have worked in the space of relationships as a coach for a long time. It's been a passion of mine. Relationships are really so foundational to, our own personal well-being and also to the well-being of the world. And there's also a lot of suffering that happens in relationships, and a lot of beauty that emerges out of relationships. Like, if you think about some of the greatest joys in your life, moments of joy, and finding your life partner, or connecting with your family, celebrating with your colleagues or other activists. And then if you also think about some of your deepest sorrows, and even some of your strongest frustrations in life, like grieving over a loved one, the loss of a loved one, or a beloved companion animal, and so forth, and all of the frustrations that we so often feel, driving on the road, or like just these kind of like misses in communications among our coworkers and fights, whatever, all of these have to do with relationships. So there's a lot of suffering in our personal lives, in relationships, and a lot of potential for joy and growth in our personal lives and in our relationships as well. And healthy relationships are really foundational to building, or creating healthier and more fulfilling lives on a personal level, and they're really foundational to creating a more compassionate and just world. And I have known this. It's been something that I've felt very passionate about, but I was so busy doing my animal rights work that I really backburnered my work on relationships until I wrote Beyond Beliefs, which is a guide for improving relationships and communication among vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters, which actually covers some of the same principles that I cover in Relationships Right, but it's really focused on the non-veg relationships. And as somebody who's worked supporting people in relationships over the years, I've always wanted to have like one book I could hand them. And there are many amazing books on relationships out there, there's no question. But I hadn't found one book that I felt like really covered everything that I felt needed to be covered. And that was really tailored to all kinds of relationships, not just romantic relationships, not just family relationships, it's not just leadership, it's not just relationships between humans, and not just relationships on the interpersonal level, relationships, how we relate as social groups to one another, how we relate to ourselves. And so this was one big, real driving factor for me. I wanted to have this like one book and read this, and this will help you kind of give you a blueprint or a template for, understanding the common denominator that drives all relationships. What does a healthy relationship look like, regardless of who you're relating to? Whether it's your life partner or whether it's, the pig down the street. They all relationships, healthy relationships look the same, essentially. They have the same qualities and principles, are based on the same qualities and principles, and all dysfunctional relationships also look the same, including how we relate to ourselves. So I really wanted to be able to, provide people with a book that covered what I felt was really foundational, not just about communication, not just about cognitive behavioral approaches, but really what I felt were the most relevant pieces of information for people to understand and that they could apply really broadly. And I wanted a book for people that addressed an issue that I believe is fundamental to creating healthy relational dynamics, but that is typically left out of other books, which is power dynamics. As vegans, we have an intuitive understanding of this. We're challenging carnistic power, essentially. We're challenging speciesist power. It doesn't mean we actually understand how power dynamics work necessarily, but our job is to really challenge dominant forms of power to help create, to help reduce abuses of power in the world. So I wanted a book that included information on how systems of oppression like carnism, speciesism, racism, sexism, these isms that I call powerarchies, how they affect us psychologically, and how this psychological impact gets brought home into our interpersonal relationships to often cause some serious problems that don't get talked about in a therapist's office, often because the therapist is not necessarily looking for these imbalances of power, essentially. So, for example, a vegan and a non-vegan in a relationship, and if you go to to talk to a relationship coach or a therapist, this power differential is typically not recognized. That the vegan has less of a say, generally less of a say, less of a sense of entitlement, and is typically perceived as being more problematic because of their views. So this is one example, but power dynamics affect relationships between men and women, for example, because of patriarchy, or between people, white people and people of color, and way beyond this. So I was really motivated to write this book for those primary reasons, and many more, which I'm sure we'll come to later. But those were the really driving reasons for at least starting to write it.
Yeah, that's very inspirational. Actually, I look forward to recommending this book because it sounds like it's a one-stop shop for people who care about their relationships and want to understand them more deeply. So I'm wondering, why are healthy relationships so central to creating a better world for all?
If you think about it, like virtually all of the most serious problems facing our world today, right? Animal exploitation, war, environmental destruction, poverty, and so on, racism and sexism, like I've said before, oppression, all of these problems reflect problems in how we relate. That's the common denominator. We tend to look at problems, social problems. We tend to look at not only social problems, but also interpersonal problems, problems of like abuse in relationships, or relationships that aren't even overtly abusive, but that are toxic and problematic in different ways. These, big issues like toxic communication that is really epidemic now, and animal exploitation, all these other forms of exploitation, and then more interpersonal issues, which is just dysfunction in interpersonal relationships, abusive workplaces, for example. We tend to think of these as kind of distinct and disconnected. And it can be really easy to despair when we think this way, because we feel like the world is just falling apart, which in some ways we know it is. The world is not in a good place right now. But we can feel like we have to, oh my God, address one problem at a time. And we can also feel really helpless in addressing these problems. But all of these problems they share a common denominator. And that common denominator is dysfunctional ways of relating. It's relationship dysfunction. And so, that's kind of the good news, because the blueprint for healthy relational dynamics, it is the same. It's the same, no matter, whether you're a world leader communicating, whether you're making, policies, creating policies, or voting for policies that are going to affect, many, many individuals, including non-human individuals, or whether you're interacting with your child or your partner. So it's very, very important that we learn to cultivate healthy ways of relating if we really want to change our world and if we want to change our lives. And learning to relate in a healthy way can be deeply transformative, both personally and socially, and of course, ecologically. When you think about it, I'm amazed. I'm always amazed that we have to learn, most of us anyway, have to learn complicated geometry that we'll probably never need to use. And we don't get a single lesson, or not a single formal lesson, on how to relate in a healthy way. When you look at the problems in the world and the problems in our lives, these are not problems that are caused by people who don't know how to do geometry. So it's, if we could really, and the information is out there. It's not rocket science. In psychology, we know enough about what healthy relationships look like. We know about the principles and the tools. And in getting relationships right, I basically, I don't want to say peruse, I did a deep dive into the relationship literature to really harvest what I had, learned over the years, but also contemporary thinking, what I felt was really the most relevant information for people who wanted to say, okay, I've read this book, I understand these concepts and how to apply them, and now I feel like I've got a foundation. I get it. I know what healthy relating and communicating is. When we change the way we relate, we can transform our world.
Wow. Very profound. It is really that when you think, or is it think globally, act locally, that phrase coming back home.
Totally.
Yeah. So how would you describe relational literacy?
Well, relational literacy is the term that I use to describe the understanding of an ability to practice healthy ways of relating. And that's really what it means. And, developing relational literacy is really the goal of the book. It's, really to help people cultivate or develop relational literacy. And, if you think about it, most of us, not only do we get no formal training in how to develop relational literacy, but the lessons that we learn are not always the healthiest ones. Our parents, the modeling that we get is done from by our parents. And if our parents didn't screw us up, then Hollywood did for them. And if Hollywood didn't do it, then the government did. And, public figures and our teachers and so on. So cultivating relational literacy is something that I think obviously is really essential for all of us, particularly for people in positions of leadership or positions of power. If you think about it, if our collective level of relational literacy were not so low, chances are very high that we would not elect people and support people in positions of power who are toxic, who are toxically non-relational or relationally dysfunctional. People wouldn't support policies, public policies and practices that cause harm to others, because they would recognize how relationally dysfunctional that is. It's like we are still in many ways living in the relational dark ages.
So we need to develop this relational literacy. Really, it has so much to do with saving the planet, helping animals. It sounds like so vital to interacting on many, many levels.
I mean, most people know this. We know this intuitively because we all know what it feels like to have an interaction with someone. And by the way, interactions are essentially mini relationships. So what I'm talking about here is like, how do we relate in a way? Meaning, how do we interact with others in a way that is healthy, healthier than it is dysfunctional. So, the kind of blueprint or the guide to cultivating healthy interactions is the same as that to cultivating healthy relationships. Relationships are basically just a string of interactions, or at least in many ways they are. And it's also important to think about relationships, or not to think about relationships dichotomously, like either your relationship is healthy or it's unhealthy, but rather to think of relationships like most things in life as falling on a spectrum. A relationship can be more or less functional or healthy and more or less dysfunctional. And, when you cultivate relational literacy, you're moving along that spectrum of function toward, healthier relational dynamics. We've been born into a deeply non-relational world, a profoundly non-relational world. So we really have inherited a mess. And it's not surprising to me, that we have people who act narcissistically and people who, make really harmful choices, and people who, all of us. None of this is a surprise to me. So really understanding relational literacy also helps us to have compassion for the behaviors of people that would normally trigger us or upset us or frustrate us, or so forth. You think about vegans and how vegans feel about non-vegans, and like, why can't you just get it? Part of when you understand relational literacy, it helps you understand that how most of us, I would say all of us, are doing the best we can based on who we are, how we're hardwired and where we've come from. And so I should probably kind of mention when I'm talking about cultivating healthy relationships, what I actually mean by that and what that actually looks like. So people know like what the, more concrete, have something a bit more concrete. A healthy interaction or a healthy relationship is one that reflects integrity. So let's say you're interacting with somebody, right? You're practicing integrity towards them. Meaning, integrity is the integration of values, core moral values and practices. And the core moral values I'm referring to here are the universal human values of compassion and justice, compassion and fairness, right? So a healthy interaction, when you're interacting with somebody, that's a healthy interaction when you're practicing your integrity, when you're basically treating them in the way that you would want to be treated, practicing the golden rule. So you're being compassionate and fair towards them, and you're honoring their dignity in the process. Our dignity is our sense of inherent worth, intrinsic worth. So when you're interacting with somebody in a healthy way, you are essentially practicing respect toward them, perceiving and treating them in a way that says, I don't perceive you as morally inferior or as inferior to me or anybody else on this planet. I honor your dignity. So healthy interactions result in a sense of greater connection. And this is, of course, mutual. An interaction is two-sided. You need to be practicing integrity toward yourself as well. So if you're engaged with somebody who's disrespecting you, then the healthy choice is to disengage from that interaction or from that relationship. So healthy relationships, or healthy interactions, I should say, to keep it simple, are interactions that reflect integrity, honor dignity, and lead to connection, a sense of connection. If you think about the relationships in your life, chances are you feel that other individual practices integrity toward you. They respect you. And you feel that your dignity is honored. You don't feel that they perceive you as somehow less than or less deserving of being treated with respect. And chances are you feel a sense of connection with them. And then if we look at the opposite, a dysfunctional relational dynamic or way of relating is one that violates integrity, harms dignity, so it communicates to the other that they're less than, they're less worthy of being treated with respect than you or anybody else is. And that leads to disconnection, creates a sense of disconnection. And so that's really what I'm talking about. And relationships fall somewhere on the spectrum as, connecting, disconnection, connecting, or healthier or more dysfunctional. But this is kind of like, a boiled down template. So when you are engaged in an interaction, you can pause and ask yourself, am I practicing integrity? Is this person practicing, does it seem that they're practicing integrity toward me? Am I honoring dignity? Am I perceiving this person as less than? In one red flag or indication that you're not honoring dignity is if you feel the charge of contempt. Contempt is an indicator that you've placed yourself, or one has placed themselves, in a position of moral superiority. The flip side of contempt is shame. So an indication that you're in a potentially dysfunctional interaction is if you feel shame. If you feel that the other person is communicating with you in a way that suggests that you're less than. Now you might, or less worthy than, of being treated with respect. So, you might feel shame in an interaction just due to your own inner, dialogue about an interaction or whatever. I mean, we shame ourselves all the time when we compare ourselves to an idealized version of ourselves. We practice contempt toward ourselves, but these contempt and shame are red flags that the dynamic is not as healthy as it could be.
Wow. Thanks for getting deep into it, because I think understanding the values and morals that you're presenting and how to use those in a way as standards in our relationship is very helpful. So how is Getting Relationships Right different from other books about relationships?
I mean, as I explained in the beginning, it's really, I think one way that it's different is that it's very comprehensive in that it's not just about communication. It's not just about, marriage or or romantic relationships. It's not one particular approach to relationships. And it certainly is not just looking at interpersonal relationships. It's like providing a guide. I talk about relational resilience in the book, and relational resilience is what the frame that I use that guides. I'll talk about that in a minute. That it's a guiding framework for all kinds of relationships. So it's comprehensive, and it's really taking into account the effect of social systems on relationships.
So tell us more about relational resilience.
Yes, and I should have said actually relationship resilience. So in my book, I talk about how relationships are like bodies, right? They get sick when their immune system is weaker than the germs that they're exposed to. And in this case, when I'm talking about relationships, I'm not talking about actual germs, obviously. I'm talking about stressors. So relationships get sick, essentially, or develop problems when the immune system of the relationship is weaker than the stressors that relationship encounters. And when I talk about relationship resilience, I talk about what a strong relationship resilience is basically, or a resilient relationship is basically a relationship that has a strong immune system. And the relational immune system is comprised of two components, security and connection. So basically our relationship is more resilient, able to withstand and bounce back from stress. It's more resilient when we feel more secure and more connected with each other. So again, think about a relationship in your life. I mean, chances are you feel like that relationship is able to withstand problems that you might encounter, like a misunderstanding between each other, or, somebody, I don't know, maybe losing their job in a family relationship or something, and causing stress in the system. Chances are, your relationship feels more resilient to you when you feel more secure with that other individual, when you feel more connected with them. And again, like most things in life, relationship resilience exists on a spectrum. It's not like you're secure and connected or you're not, but you can be more or less secure and connected in a relationship. And in getting relationships right, basically I talk about the principles and tools for building relationship resilience. So what do you need to do? What kind of behaviors and attitudes will help you create a more resilient relationship. There was something else I was going to say about that, and it just escaped me. So I also, thank you for pausing for me. I was about to say, I'll probably remember it at an inopportune time, but I remembered it soon enough. So the other key to keeping your relationship healthy, besides keeping the immune system strong, is also being able to identify the germs or the stressors, that the relationship encounters. Some of these stressors we already know, they're really obvious. Like I talked about, maybe the loss of the job or the development of an illness or needing to take care of a family member. Depending on what kind of a relationship it is, it might experience different types of stressors. But there are certain stressors that have a really profound impact on relationships that most people don't recognize. And these are what I refer to as like the invisible germs that impact our relationships. And these are social systems, dysfunctional social systems. They're systems of oppression, or what I refer to as powerarchies. Systems that I referred to earlier, such as racism and sexism, and we're talking to animal advocates here, so speciesism or carnism. These systems that are set up so that they create an automatic power differential between the members of the system, right? So for example, in sexism or patriarchy, which is the oppressive system that conditions us to elevate masculinity over femininity, I'm putting all of this in quotes, right? Grants males, men, and boys more social power than women and people of other genders. It automatically creates a certain way, a distorted way of thinking in both men and women, people of all genders, that then impact the way that we interact in our interpersonal relationships, usually without us realizing it. So, for example, girls and women tend to be socialized to feel responsible for cultivating and maintaining healthy relationships. Men and boys less so. Girls and women are also socialized to tend to feel like they're less entitled to having their needs met than men are. This is not blaming anybody. It's just simply the way that we've been socialized, and there's tons of research supporting this. So in an interpersonal relationship, with a heterosexual relationship between a man and a woman, there's a good chance, and there are other factors can offset this, but there's still, it's only to a degree, but there's a good chance that the woman will tend to subsume her needs in order to fulfill the man's needs, and that the relationship will become over time increasingly unbalanced as she kind of gives in more and allows him to kind of take up more emotional space. When he's happy, she's happy. When he's not happy, she's not happy. And she's more likely to do the caregiving work and relationship management work than he is. And over time, this can create an increasing power imbalance. So this is one example. And of course, with vegans watching, carnism is an obvious example. You have, as a vegan, you know what it feels like. Many vegans know what it feels like to always be feeling apologetic for our choices and not wanting to inconvenience the people in our lives, and to feel and to be perceived as though, when we make a request, that we're actually making a demand. I mean, how many vegans have heard that? Like, oh, you're pushing your values on me, or you're not asking for something, I stop demanding and telling me what I can and can't eat or what I can and can't put on the table. These dominant systems, these powerarchies, distort perceptions that really impact us quite profoundly. So in this case that I was talking about, these systems distort our perceptions of needs, essentially. So vegans' needs are automatically perceived as less important than the non-vegans' needs, often. Vegans' requests are automatically perceived as demands, and the non-vegans' demands are often automatically just framed as requests. So we get into these interpersonal struggles without realizing that, they actually, the real problem is not the interpersonal issue. I mean, maybe there are other problems, but the real problem is the invisible germ that's affecting us. And when we recognize these germs, then we can unite as individuals to actually try to offset the influence of the germ. We say, okay, it's us together, quote unquote, against the germ.
Ooh, I like that. That is a really effective strategy instead of having people against one another. So this is really insightful information. I love the analogy to the immune system and the invisible germ. I can definitely think of some invisible germs in some relationships that I've had. So, thinking about the books that you've written, they're also really helpful for activists. And
Thank you.
I'm curious about this book that you're describing, the Getting Relationships Right. How is it different than, say, Beyond Beliefs or your last book, Powerarchy?
Well, Beyond Beliefs has a lot of similar information. The principles and tools for healthy ways of relating, as Getting Relationships Right, but it doesn't have nearly as much information just on healthy relationships, because a lot of the book is filled with information about what does this mean for veganism, or what are issues that are unique to veganism. So Getting Relationships Right is just more comprehensive when it comes to principles and tools for healthy ways of relating. And Powerarchy is about the psychology of oppression. So Powerarchy really, basically, what I talk about in Powerarchy is I talk about non-relationality. Powerarchies, these systems of oppression that I've described as powerarchies, and a powerarchy can also be an abusive relationship or a dysfunctional relationship. In Powerarchy, I talk about how oppressive systems, such as the ones I mentioned before, or just oppressive relational systems or work systems, are non-relational systems, meaning they're systems that condition us to relate in a way that harms integrity, violates dignity, results in disconnection, and often grows power imbalances between individuals or among groups. So Getting Relationships Right, in a sense, pulls a lot of my work together. The antidote, in my opinion, to powerarchy, this oppressive system and the mentality that goes along with it, is relational literacy. When we understand healthy relationality, we can offset a lot of these problems. But I also wrote Relationships Right as a book for people in the mainstream. This is my first book that is not designed either for animal rights activists or vegans, or for people working specifically on oppression. It's a book for anybody who wants to improve their relationships. And, my hope is that the book will contribute. Number one, my hope is that this is a book vegans can give to non-vegans in their lives who are not interested in reading about veganism and about their relationship with the vegan, but who are interested in improving their own relationships, which a lot of people are. And then they will have a tool that really helps them to think about, helps them to build their empathy, to understand their empathy, to develop self-awareness and critical thinking, to question these systems that we're all a part of, to think about compassion and what that looks like in our minute-to-minute lives. So my hope is that this will be a book that vegans could share with people in their lives who are not open to reading a book about veganism, but who might then read this and have tools for relating to that vegan in a way that's a lot healthier, and maybe for relating to the rest of the world as well. I also wanted to have a tool for vegans, actually, that would help vegans cultivate relational literacy in order to help increase the resilience of the vegan movement as a whole. I talked about relationship resilience. A relationship is simply a system. A system is an entity that Yeah, a system is an entity that's made up of two or more parts. In this case, I'm talking about, two or more people. And so a system is also the vegan movement. The vegan movement is a system, and that movement is more resilient when it's more secure and connected. I am so deeply committed to the success of the vegan movement. I mean, my entire life is really, my work is so organized around, helping support people who are doing this incredible work and support the movement as a whole. And one of the things that pains me is when I see the movement struggling with toxic moral perfectionism, toxic communication, and being, not being a safe space for the people who need it so much, because the world doesn't feel like a safe space when you're a vegan. And I want to support that. And I know that, there's very good reasons for why there are problems within the movement. My hope is that this book can make a contribution to helping create a movement that's more resilient, that's more secure and connected, that retains people who come to it, and that helps people not only stay in it, but thrive in it, and form deeper connections with each other, and also use these principles to talk about the issue of animal exploitation in a way that increases the chances that others will hear their message.
Yes, I think giving them some of the background, I love the idea that the book itself is, it has some of the other concepts that you've written about in your previous books, but couched in a slightly different tone and a different intention, so that people who read it, who may not be in the vegan movement, they get to learn some of those concepts that you talked about in Powerarchy, and also about how to relate the way you do so well in the Beyond Beliefs book. And so why is it important then for the vegan advocates to learn these tools to relate and communicate effectively with non-vegans and with vegans?
Well, communication is the primary way that we relate. So, I have a chapter in the book specifically on tools for effective communication, because that's important. But, everything that I write about in the book is automatically can be applied to communication. And vegans really people struggle with communicating effectively. But we are, we're in an especially challenging situation, in that we are trying to communicate about an issue that many people are deeply defended against hearing about. So it's not even just like, it's not even just the challenge of communication that everybody has, but we have to try to communicate about something that not only do people typically not want to hear about, but that they're like very deeply defended against hearing about, and often they have like distorted perceptions about it. So, just as an example, as a vegan, as soon as you start talking about veganism with a non-vegan, it's not uncommon anyway for you to be perceived as and labeled as biased. And the reality, and that is such an incredibly irrational assumption. I mean, it's such an incredibly irrational thing to think if you really deconstruct it, but it happens all the time. People don't recognize the bias of the dominant animal eating culture and assume that anybody who challenges it must be biased themselves. So, it's like, it's really important to understand, like understanding healthy ways of relating helps, and effective communication helps you to identify, some distortions anyway. It helps you to recognize, okay, this is a defensive reaction. I'm not going to engage with the defenses and get into a fight here and a debate. My goal is not to like win an argument. My goal is to create connection. And, understanding healthy ways of relating helps to remind us that, underneath the difference of opinion is a relationship between people. And that's where our focus needs to be. I think it's very important for vegans for everybody in the world to develop relational literacy and learn the principles and tools for effective communication. No question. I mean, it's life-changing. And for me, it's been probably the most life-changing thing that I have learned in my life. And I think it's also really important for vegans in terms of like helping them with their own self-care. Because as I said earlier, this book is not just about how to relate to other people in a way that's healthy. It's also how to relate to yourself in a way that's healthy. And it's challenging being a vegan in a dominant animal eating culture. We are pioneers. You know, this movement is young. Anybody who is involved in this movement at this point in time is really on the front lines and is doing really pioneering work, really paving the way. I think future generations of vegans are not going to need webinars like this one. They're not going to need books like mine because we've done the work that we're doing. But it's hard work, and it's hard to keep your chin up, and it's hard to live in a culture that, you know, daily offends some of your deepest sensibilities. And it's really important for us to know how to relate to ourselves in a way so that we don't do to ourselves what the culture is already doing to us, you know, so we don't engage in self-shaming behavior, you know, so we feel like, you know, anchored in our truth, and that we feel self-connected, because, you know, I was talking about dysfunctional relationships earlier and how they result in a feeling of disconnection rather than connection. It's not different when it comes to our relationship with ourselves. Our primary relationship is, in fact, with ourselves. I mean, we are relating to ourselves every minute of every day through our self-talk. And most of us talk to ourselves in ways that we would never tolerate coming from anybody else. And studies have shown that our self-talk has an impact on our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth, our ability to achieve what we want to achieve, and many other things. And we're also relating to ourselves all the time through the choices that we make. We're always making choices that impact our future selves. So it's important for us to learn to relate to ourselves in a way that is empowering, that is healthy, that creates a sense of connection, a deeper connection with us and ourselves, so we can feel anchored in ourselves as we move through this, you know, very challenging world.
Wow, that is so inspirational. I really appreciate it. And it's on so many levels, being able to be nice to ourselves is really key. So what do you think are some of the possible consequences of these dysfunctional interactions and relationships?
Well, I mean, most relationships don't die because of a single blow, you know, or a single event. Most relationships die the death of a thousand cuts. You know, it's all of the little disconnections that just keep occurring over time until there's not enough left to hold the relationship together. Sometimes relationships are meant to evolve in this way, you know. Often, however, we lose relationships in our lives that we wouldn't necessarily want to lose. We don't necessarily have to lose, because we don't know how to relate in a way that helps us to stay secure and connected with each other. It would be nice to have the choice of, you know, whether to stay in a relationship or not. So one of the consequences is the dissolution of relationships, and even relationships that are better off, you know, transforming into something else, like from a romantic relationship to platonic, or ending altogether. You know, very often relationships end in ways that traumatize people. And then they carry that traumatic baggage into the next relationship and harm that partner that they're with, that new partner that they're with, or that new friend that they have. Often this is more likely to happen in romantic relationships, but not always. You know, you can be traumatized by something that happens in your workplace with your boss, for example. So we are, you know, when it comes to our attachment, the way that we attach to other individuals, you know, many of us are deeply, you know, we've been through some really difficult times, whether with our parents, you know, primary caregivers, our own family systems and relationships we've had. When we learn to relate in a healthy way, we reduce the likelihood that we become like that we're traumatized by a breakup, for example, or that we cause harm to others. In my book, I talk about ending romantic relationships with integrity, and how we're so socialized not to do that. Like, if you think about how people end romantic relationships and the language we use, like so-and-so was dumped like a piece of garbage, you know, or dropped. it's really striking, and how we seem to believe that somehow it's appropriate to just completely disregard somebody's phone calls or attempts at connection simply because we're no longer considering ourselves in a relationship. I mean, sometimes you need to do that because it's problematic not to, but very often we end romantic relationships in ways that are essentially abusive, and this is really normalized. And so, and this often happens, these dynamics often happen when people are at the most vulnerable that they will ever be in this relationship. So learning relational literacy is really, I believe, very important and useful if we want to kind of like break the cycle of, sometimes it actually is trauma, other times it's not trauma and it's just like, severe distress. But either way, if we want to break this cycle of like violence, we need to learn how to relate in ways that are nonviolent.
Wow. That says it all. I mean, that really says it all. I appreciate your commitment to improving our relationships and also to creating a more peaceful world through these interactions. So I'd like to invite people who've joined us for the interview to ask questions as well. There's a couple ways to do that. You can either type them in. If you're with us online, there's a Q&A box that you can type into. There's also a chat box. I noticed there's a couple questions there, so we'll be looking at those. If you've joined us live, you can type your question into the live feed. And let's see here. We'll go ahead. I'm going to start with the Q&A here. So Miriam says she's saying hello to you, and also is thrilled to be in your seminar. And she's thankful that you're sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
She's saying it sounds like your book is good for non-vegan family to help them understand a vegan family member. That's what she wants to clarify. And also she wants to know if your book will also help these family members to understand what veganism is about, why she became vegan, for example, and to help them go vegan.
Well, so yes and. So my book, Beyond Beliefs, is a guide to improving relationships and communication among vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters. And that book is really designed for people who vegans, for example, who want to raise awareness about veganism among their family members. That's really the focus of the book. And it has a lot of principles and tools of how to relate effectively and communicate effectively in there. There's no question. Fewer of those principles and tools then are in getting relationships right, because it's a different focus of the book. So Beyond Beliefs might be a more appropriate read. However, and I should say to Miriam, if you have, there are scripts in Beyond Beliefs, like I actually have appendices at the end of the book that you can just photocopy and give to your family members, or you can like take them, they're yours to use however you want. And like a letter, dear non-vegan, this is what I wish you understood so that you would understand me. Here's why I became vegan, and here's what it's like for me to become vegan, and this is what I wish you understood. I also have a chapter specifically for non-vegans and that to read to help them understand veganism. So that might be useful for you. But if your family members are like just resistant to anything that has to do with veganism, then Getting Relationships Right is a book that will say, to them, if you want to relate to your family members, aka you, in a way that is effective and healthy, here's how to do it. And hopefully, this would encourage them to listen openly and be willing to learn what you want to share with them about veganism.
Thanks for clarifying that. I think that definitely helps. And there's another question also about your books from Suzanne, and she's asking, which of your books is the best one to recommend for non-vegan friends who are already on board with the importance of social justice? She wants to help them look at veganism the same way they look at other imbalances.
That's a good question. So Powerarchy is the book that I wrote for people who are interested in challenging social injustices. And what I look at is like, what is the common denominator among all of these injustices? What is the common mentality that drives us to carry out harm toward other human groups and also toward non-human groups and also toward the environment? So Powerarchy is a little bit more kind of like heady than the other books, I would say. But it is written to speak to people who are not necessarily on board with veganism or, aware of carnism, but who really do care about creating a more compassionate and just world. And it does talk specifically about how animals factor into the equation. So I think that would be the best book for addressing this.
I have a simple question next, which is your book available like in an audio version?
Yes, well, I should say Getting Relationships Right will be out on February 11th. You can pre-order it now, but it will be an audio as well. I think the audio version might even be available now. I'm not sure, but definitely by February 11th.
Wonderful. And we also have Allison who's saying she's thanking you, and she says part of the integrity of treating ourselves, or part of integrity is treating ourselves with integrity. Then can you say a bit more about that, like how we treat ourselves, and also any tips for limiting the negative self-talk?
Yeah, I mean, great question. So part of, changing the way we treat ourselves involves developing, our inner observer, our self-observer. It's that part of us that's always there, that's always been there, always will be there, that we often don't realize is there. That's the part of you that's just watching. If you're a meditator, you know what I'm talking about. It's the part of you that's just watching. It's watching your inner dialogue, it's watching what's happening around you, and it's watching objectively and compassionately without making up a story about it, without making judgments about it. Your inner observer is like a muscle. It grows the more you practice, the more you exercise it. And meditation is a fantastic way, probably the best way to grow it, I should say, is through meditation. And there are some apps right now that make meditating quite easy, well, compared to what it could be. I use Headspace, which I find is great, headspace.com. So developing this process of noticing your thoughts and noticing that voice in your head. And when you notice it, just watching it, like just notice it. Don't buy into what it's saying, just notice it. And notice what it's saying. And imagine if you were communicating that way with somebody else. Would this be a way that you would be willing to communicate with them? Apart from just developing your inner observer and ideally engaging in meditation, which is also can be life transforming. There's a great book that is all about identifying and changing your self-talk, and it's called Feeling Good, the New Mood Book. And I reference my book, Getting Relationships Right, has a lot of other books that I reference in it for people who are interested in one specific area that they want to learn more about. And this is the book that I would recommend for that. And Feeling Good it's a self-help book. It was originally written for people who suffer from depression, but now it's for anybody who wants to identify and change their self-talk and also their self-narrative. It's based on cognitive behavioral approach. In the book, I have other resources as well, but that might be a good start. And just the fact that you want to work and communicate with yourself more compassionately can be really helpful. A great start. I would also say that, we can learn to love ourselves through being loved, through loving and being loved by others. And one of the most profound ways for us to change the way we relate to ourselves is to cultivate, if possible, when possible, healthy relationships with others. When you have a healthy relationship with somebody else, that the way that person treats you becomes like a model for you in terms of how you treat yourself. So we can heal our relationship with ourselves through healing in relationship with others. So for some people, it's really hard to just work on themselves individually. It's always great to recognize that your relationships are like They're a training ground, for which to grow your relational muscle. And when you grow that, it applies to all of your relationships, including your relationship with yourself.
Beautiful. So we have a couple other questions for you. What are some strategies, this is from Ed, to create more relationship resilience when the other person is displaying disruptive behavior, such as dominance or contempt?
What a great question. So, I mean, the first question is really, let me back up. When you apply, when you apply the tools of healthy relationality or relating healthfully, sometimes the people in your life who are not engaging with you or have not been engaging with you in a healthy way will also change too. One person can actually, often have a lot of influence on their own relationship. Sometimes that other person will resist, because people tend to resist breaking patterns and eventually come around. Sometimes they won't. And if you engage with them in a way that's reflecting your integrity and honoring their dignity and trying to protect your own integrity, and they continually resist, then that's important information for you to have about that relationship. The first step is to protect yourself and make sure that you never put yourself in a situation that's unsafe, and make that a primary commitment. Like a commitment, again, to your own security and connection are the foundations of healthy relationships. If you do not feel secure with somebody, then the first step is making sure that you don't engage with this person unless you believe that it's going to be a safe way to engage. And I can't get into it now, but in my chapter on effective communication, it talks about how to communicate in a way that increases the chances the other person will hear you. And this includes when you're requesting that they treat you more respectfully. So, but tell yourself that you're committing to your own safety, and you won't put yourself in a situation where you don't feel secure. And that might mean taking a step back and taking a break from having those interactions.
So we're getting close to the end of our interview. We have one other question that has to do with an issue in the animal rights movement. So I'll just float this by you. So the question is, for example, it's about red flags in relationships. So you've invested time and emotion into an AR activity, a campaign, activity, or group, and realize the person that you've begun working with is incapable or unwilling to communicate. So you've made many attempts to communicate to no avail, and it becomes toxic, even to the point of being verbally abused and manipulated. But you feel emotionally tied to the project, that campaign, and how many attempts should you try to make it work? And also, how do you know when to walk away?
Yeah, this is going to be hard for me to answer without more information, but if there are other people involved in the campaign, I would suggest talking to them and seeing if you can get people there to be allies and to maybe do an intervention with this other person. I don't know if there are ways, other options between, either disengaging and dropping the campaign, or staying in the campaign but changing, creating more distance between yourself and the campaign, so you take a different role in it, so you're not as close to this person who's engaging toxically. I would say that I would prioritize healthy relationships over a lot of things, including the time you've invested in a campaign, because don't underestimate the energy suck and the soul suck that we experience when we're in toxic relationships. One of the problems we have in our movement is that people are burning out and they're quitting the movement. And one of the main reasons, or a key reason that they're burning out, is because of toxic interactions with people. And, one of the biggest and most important investments you can make in yourself as an activist, not just as a human being, is to committing to your own self-care. And your own self-care means not allowing yourself to be around toxicity, or not putting yourself in the position where you're being disrespected. And I think in terms of the investment that you would make in the movement, that's probably a lot more significant than you would make staying a part of a campaign, because that increases the chances that you are going to be in this movement for the long haul and not burn out, and that you're going to be moving through your life as an activist in this movement in a way that is healthy, reducing the chances that you're going to become, start feeling really toxic yourself. Toxic behaviors are contagious. Many studies have shown this. So we all need to inoculate ourselves so that we stay as healthy as possible. And often, or sometimes that means disengaging from somebody who's acting in a toxic way, especially if you've already tried changing it.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for getting into the nitty-gritty of some of these deeply troubling activist questions, because many of us have experienced that. Actually, I think that Paul Gorski found that in his recent study that of animal rights activists, that actually infighting was one of the key reasons and factors for burnout. So this is a really important question, and I can see how this book on getting relationships right can help so many of us in having those core practices and principles. So I look forward to recommending this book. And
Thank you.
yeah, and thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. And thanks to everyone who's joined us. We've had such a wonderful discussion, and it's been great to have your voices. And I wanted to let you know we do have other activist author interviews coming up this week, and you can find out more about that at idausa.org/activist month. And you'll get lots of resources, including information about our support line, which we offer to activists to provide free counseling and emotional support. And I'll give you the number just in case you don't have it. It's 800-705-0425. So this has been a great opportunity. I'm so excited about this conversation. And for those people who have joined in the webinar, in the Zoom, I will be sending a replay to you, and I will include some of the resources that Melanie shared, for example, the book titles and other things like that. So stay tuned. You'll get all the information that will come to you by tomorrow.
Yeah. And can I just mention, if
Of course.
anybody would like more information, they can go to melaniejoy.org.
Yes, and we will include that in the follow-up information too. So thank you so much, Melanie. Wow, what a wonderful contribution to our Activist Appreciation Month. I'm deeply grateful to you.
I'm so grateful to you and to everybody who's doing this really important work. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us. We hope that you'll feel inspired for your activism and appreciated as well as an activist. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everyone.